Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabin, and I run Tech Partner Enablement and Advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Asher Matthew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Unlearn, where I have to spend an hour with Kelly again, interviewing somebody else. And actually, this is not an interview, so this is really a conversation. But today we're in for a treat because the guest that we have is an extremely accomplished professional in partnerships. So we normally don't do this, but Ross, do you want to just give us a little bit of an intro of who you are? Because I'm sure a lot of our audience does not know you. And this conversation is going to tell them that you are a legit leader in partnerships.
Okay, so let's. You want to start at the beginning and work forward because that's a fun story.
Yeah, totally.
So I started my career as a developer and quickly realized how much I hated actually writing software.
Wait, Asher has the same story, but Asher only lasted 1 week. Did you last longer than a week?
9 months working for a company. To tell you how old I am, I built a credit card verification system in a 4GL database language. It was Informix.
Wait, that's what I did too. I did a credit card processing for the Microsoft Microsoft Dynamics GP products. Okay.
This was way earlier than Dynamics.
Wait, okay, got it.
This was back in the 80s, 89 or whatever. And I created, this is before you even had in-room, on-demand television and stuff, where Netflix didn't exist, any of that stuff. So back at resorts in Florida where I lived, because I'm an original Florida man, I got better.
I like that as a tagline. You should have that as in your LinkedIn profile.
Graduated from University of Central Florida and stuff like that. So I'm very proud to be from Florida. I'm very proud to not live there anymore. So this is back in the day where you had actual VCRs in hotel rooms at resorts like Disney World and stuff like that. So all the Grand Marriott and stuff. And we had this cabinet down in the lobby that would rent VCR tapes that had a little solenoid that would top it out. And I had to write the credit card processing system for all that stuff. And then I realized 2 lessons. One, when you're a developer in a small company, when the product's done, you are now unsightly corporate overhead. That's one. And prone to be gotten. And second, it's boring. Once you've finished and gone into maintenance mode, the thrill of actually solving the problem goes away, and it goes into just keeping the machine going bing every day, which is boring. So I left there and I went to a partner. I ended up running a microage franchise in Central Florida, where that was my first partner experience, was going out and selling Solomon 3 accounting, which then became Great Plains and a bunch of other stuff.
Yep.
To orange growers and concrete manufacturers and all these other light industry folks in Central Florida. After working there for a while, I did a short stint, a very hilarious short stint in a company called Worldwide Technology. I was employee number 17, what is now a $6 billion powerhouse. I was one of 2 employees that was hired in Central Florida that was then promptly laid off 6 months later because they figured out they had overexpanded too fast, even though we were killing it. We were scratching our heads trying to figure out, between my boss Phil and I, we had created a $3 million business at 30 points of margin within 6 months. So we generated $1 million of free cash flow for that business. But we certainly didn't cost $1 million because I know what I was paid at the time. I scratched our heads as to why they shut us down, and I found out later the COO was embezzling money and writing it off as our division was losing money.
Wait, it's happening right now again, just in a different form.
Yeah. Well, this one was hilarious because I was in my 20s and early stage and stuff, and I really hadn't done anything interesting in the industry yet. And so I ended up getting laid off from this job in the same week that I also got divorced. So I'm homeless, jobless, dogless. I lost my pet dog, all that other stuff. The ex-wife took it. And so
it sounds like a redemption tale. I feel like this is the low point of the story.
Well, it's kind of funny. The mentor and the guy I worked for, Phil, was a good friend of mine. He had a long history in the tech industry, really industrial distribution and stuff. And I'm standing in his office and he's like, "I'm fired, you're fired. We both have no plans. What do you want to do?" And he's like, "Well, you also don't have a house, so you can live anywhere." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "How do you feel about Tampa, Florida?" I'm like, "It feels like a place. Why?" And he says, "Well, I want you to go down and meet with my friend Steve, and he'll get a job for you if you're reasonably talented, and you are." So I'm like, "Steve who?" And he's like, "Well, Steve Raymond." I'm like, "You mean the CEO at Tech Data?" And he goes, Yeah, his dad used to rent an apartment from me, and he was over at my house all the time when he was playing basketball in high school. And I know Steve really well. So my first interview at Tech Data was with the CEO coming in there as a guy who's run a partner and now built this Sun business and all this other stuff, worldwide technology. Whereas the average employee walking in the door at Tech Data is just 2 years into community college and really just looking for some money to go to Krabby Bill's on the beach and buy a margarita. So I went in and did pretty well there. I built the first. So I joined like everyone does in sales and was in volume accounts for about 3 months. Then moved over to running the federal territory, and then helped build the first GSA schedule at Tech Data, and then got pulled out to do a special project to build the first build to order, because you had the situation where, like, say you're a VAR with 10 people and you just won like the state of Kansas school board contract for laptops for every student. You got to create 40,000 laptops. You're not doing that with 10 people. And so you have to have a distributor do that for you. And so we built a bunch of those things. And then after about a year of doing these little projects, I got pulled over to be the first product manager in the software business there. And I was in my mid 20s at this point. And on a personal note, my ex-wife had also decided, in addition to no longer wanting to be married, she no longer wanted to be a mother either. So I ended up getting custody of my two boys that were 18 months old and 3 months old. At the same time, I took on this job to launch 192 software vendors in 18 months. And so that was like one of those periods where you don't do a lot of sleep, you do a lot of launching, a lot of like guerrilla marketing and figuring out how to get products out there. But at that point, I realized
that sounds like an insane lifestyle with two
not,
little kids. You don't get sleep anyway, and then you're taking on this big job.
Yeah,
this is a master class in personal and professional partnerships.
What's your advice there? I have to stop you because I think what advice would you give to someone who's in that position? Because I would say this disproportionately affects women, right? You find a lot of women who struggle to like do that balance where they have young kids.
So one of the first things you learn to do this, which I don't think women do well, and not to be sexist, but women are pleasers. They don't like disappointing people. And to survive that, you have to make really hard choices fast on what are you going to commit to and what are you not going to commit to. And learning to say no quickly really is important. Like the ability to eliminate things that aren't actually achieving the mission of raising healthy children and succeeding at your job and stuff. So, do I want to go out with my friends tonight? No, I'm going to write marketing copy. I'm going to go stay home and make mac and cheese with the boys, that sort of stuff. Right?
That's good advice. Prioritization. It's key.
Prioritization and, learning that no is not a bad word. And it's also a complete sentence. Like, I don't need to explain no. Like, no. The minute I start giving you explanations, I'm opening up for a negotiation. And if you really have made the decision, no is a complete sentence. It's the best advice I could give people is if you really mean no, stop there.
Just mean no.
No.
Well, that's very good advice, and it comes up in partnerships all the time, right? Because partner people are often overwhelmed with people trying to reach out, wanting to network, wanting to partner, and a lot of those partnerships are just not viable. And I do think you're right. Women are disproportionately how it's society raises different genders feel compelled to offer an explanation and to explain and to justify. And once you do that, people who are ruthless will hone in on whatever you said. And then it becomes a back and forth. And a lot of times you end up saying, okay, I guess you're right. I'll go ahead. And then that's where you get the 95-hour weeks that are not sustainable.
This is a very negative word. It's like people who know what they want.
No, you're free.
Exactly.
So, I did this job at Tech Data, which was fun. We got a lot done. I realized at that point that there was never going to be a point again in my life where I felt that tired. And that was a freeing moment of like, this is the hardest it's ever going to get. And I was right. That was the hardest labor effort I've ever had to do. And I've had to put sprinkler systems in as a high school kid and stuff. This was mentally and physically harder work than anything I'd ever done. But you get to the other side of it. You've done good work. We managed to, the hard part of this, by the way, was not launching a bunch of single title products like, Ace database and things like that don't matter. It was making the argument to get Lotus and Microsoft and at the time Borland and WordPerfect and these companies that had flagship products who already had distributors. They already had good coverage. To add another distributor, you had to solve a problem for them the other guys weren't. And so the seam I went after there was we became the largest distributor of OS2 on the planet just because we focused on how to go land that thing with partners really well. In the case of Microsoft, I didn't focus on Office. I focused on landing Windows NT and going out and building a server-based business through the value-added channel as opposed to a reselling license business of software products, right? Same thing with Lotus. You go after notes. You don't go after 1, 2, 3. You show them how you can make notes a platform and build bar businesses on it. And so we were doing more technical marketing than necessarily, hey, it's this price and this kind of rebate and that sort of stuff, which to me was interesting, given engineering background. A great time there, but then IBM called and I got a job offer to come run worldwide channel marketing for the DB2 products at IBM. And at the time, IBM's challenge was, how do we become a multi-platform company? Because right now, all of their software products were running on their mainframe, on their mid-range, and on the Windows, the OS2 environment and stuff. And so they'd released DB2 for Windows NT, DB2 for Sun, DB2 for HP-UX, and all these things, which was great. It was an interesting experience. But keep in mind, at the time I joined them in '94, they were laying off 120,000 people that year. And I was one of 12 external hires that was brought in. And so it was kind of a big honor to get selected, to get hired, because this work I'd done of guerrilla launching things, Ian Bonner, who was my boss at the time, he had gotten to know me through a different company he was at, DCA Software. And then he went to IBM and was like, I want that guy to come figure out how to launch all these things. And so it was great. I got pulled into very strategic discussions at a young age. IBM was a fantastic employer in my late 20s, early 30s to do all this stuff. In terms of skill set and development, so much so that I got an offer for a promotion to go run one of the product marketing roles for DB2 in Somers, New York, and I was in. Like, I'm ready to go. Let's go follow the IBM career. For better or worse, my boss at the time said, "No, I need you to stay in the partner role. I can't let you take the promotion." And I was like, "Well, okay, well then promote me here, or let me go." And he was like,
"You didn't say no."
Yeah. Well, he went to HR and it would critically, he was one of 12 external hires. He was critical to this business. He's still critical to business. We don't want to move him, but he started promising me like a raise in 6 months and da-da-da. And what he didn't know is at the same time, I had another job offer external. So I told him, I said, either let me take the IBM job in Somers, or I'm taking a job outside the company. And he thought I was bluffing, and I wasn't. And he said, no, I really can't. And then I slid the resignation letter across the table and said, I'm going to McAfee and go build the software business there. So I was the first channel chief at McAfee, brought in to go build the first VAR program, because everything was retail. It was all antivirus licensing, and they'd acquired Sabre and all these other networking products and stuff. That was an interesting experience. Without dishing too much dirt on it, began to realize there were some accounting irregularities there. And so after 1 year and 1 day, I left McAfee, took my cliff vesting, hit that 24% cliff, and I'm out. And then a year later, the cards collapsed on them, and they had Prabhat Goyal, their CFO, end up doing some jail time, and a bunch of other officers got in trouble. But that was a great experience about, just because a company's growing fast doesn't mean they're growing well. And you can dive into looking at that. I took a job up in Seattle. This is when I moved out of Dallas and ended up moving up to Seattle. And it was a really fascinating opportunity. I know this is the longest winded introduction ever, but I promise I'll get through it.
No, this is very interesting because we have like 4 hours.
There's a lot of history here.
So, the company I went to work for was a company called Management Sciences Institute, based out of Seattle, which is a kind of a BS made up name that really was a strategy consulting firm for tech firms. In that job, I had the opportunity in a 5-year period to just do everything: design new licensing programs for enterprise customers, build enterprise sales models, build product launches between Intel and Nortel as a joint venture, as a sort of for hire product manager to bring two companies together. So in short, I had the opportunity to design 70 different go-to-market programs in that time period, which when I look back on it, it was like, that experience at Tech Data of 192 launches, followed by this solve these strategic problems for folks that are channel chiefs and CMOs at, companies like Cisco and Apple and places like that. During that time period, which this was 97 to 2002 time period, you were doing through the dot-com boom and the collapse and all the other stuff that went on there. So, and Y2K. So there's this massive sort of churning going on. Well, the company I was working for ended up getting bought by WPP, the parent company of Ogilvy and Mather and J. Walter Thompson and all this other stuff. And the reason they bought us was hilarious, because I'll dive into this in a second. If you look at buying a professional services company, the way those are structured, because the only value is the people, is a little bit of money up front and a whole lot of money over time based on an earn out of making the business sustainable without you there as a principal. So how do you make this a functioning division of a company as opposed to a consulting firm that's really run by its 7 principals. Normally, you would do that as like 20% upfront, 80% over 2 years or whatnot. These guys gave us 90% upfront. Here's the money. Go away. You have a non-compete. Now, the question was why? And it was because we were telling every CMO and every tech company in the Valley to stop spending money on advertising, on television, on radio, on print, and move everything into display and search engine and digital marketing. And Ogilvy and Mather and J. Walter Thompson, all these ad agencies hadn't created or bought digital agencies yet. So they had no way to deal with that shift in spend, which was literally moving $1 billion in pass-through fees off their books and moving it to Google and moving it to Microsoft Search and moving to advertising, Avenue A and all these other sorts of firms. So that was here's a bunch of money for you guys to shut up and go away. Now, because I was hired in as opposed to one of the founders there, I didn't have the original non-compete documents. So I started a small firm with about 10 employees and immediately started doing the same thing, cooking along. And then 9/11 happened, and 9/11 killed all discretionary spend. Like every company in the world went from, hey, let's hire people to do stuff, to no. So I got all 10 employees jobs at clients. We landed them as employees in those places. And then I ended up going to work for Citrix Systems in 2002, where I'd done a bunch of projects. They built their enterprise sales team, their licensing model, and their transaction models and all that stuff. The CEO there and I had become good friends. And he called me up and said, I need you to come to work here. And this was on June 27th or whatever of 2002. And I said, great. When do you want me to start? He's like, next month. And I'm thinking August because I live in Seattle and I've got to move to Florida and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, next month is fine. And he goes, great. I'll see you Monday, which was July 1st. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm going to the local Nordstrom's and buying some clothes. I guess I'm getting an apartment and not going back to Seattle. I ended up going to work there and had a great experience where the challenge that they had, and I'll do this as an introduction because I'll get through this, what my history is, but this is kind of an important part of it. They had screwed up their go-to-market. Their product was fine, and it had gone through a transition from being used for remote access to networks to being a way to deliver complex applications like SAP. And it really, without going into technical reasons, it was the only way you could really deploy large SAP environments. That has to do with SAP as a client being very chatty. And as soon as you get 5,000 of those clients, you've got this packet firestorm going off on the network. And all of a sudden, voice over IP doesn't work and nothing else works. So the upshot is they were declining 11% year on year in GAAP revenue, but we were losing partners like crazy. And so that was the place that I developed the first deal registration program in the industry and created a concept of, for a complex solution sale, there's only one person who knows about it, and that's the partner the customer called to talk about the problem and get recommended solutions. And once that's there, and by the time it gets to procurement, 45, 60 days later, and you've done the POC, it's now a question of what's your price, right? And so you end up with this model where somebody spends 6 months creating a deal, and then procurement could say, all right, so you've got 6 months cost of sale, you've got the cost of a phone call, you've got the cost of a phone call, you've got the cost of a phone call. My price is now 2 points above cost. And you end up with the person who spent 6 months developing that deal saying there's no economic incentive to generate new deals. I make as much money in professional services servicing customers that already bought it. Why would I spend that energy? So we moved 25 points of discount off of the front end for distribution and moved it to the back end as an incentive. Said if you registered this, and at least 45 days pass from the date of registration to close, which means you actually have a customer who's going through a POC, because if it's buying additional licenses, you're not waiting 45 days. You need those within 2 days. If you're buying it for the first time, it never happens in less than 60 days. So we were able to distinguish between net new deals and resale of license. That dramatically shifted the company. The stock went from $5.80 to $35 and saved the company. Revenue went up. We started seeing 27% year-on-year growth, and things were back in good. So that was a really
all because of deal registration.
What's that?
It said, was this all because of deal registration?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the very first time it had been done where we had basically created the observation here was a technical one, which was the APIs at Salesforce were now open, so you could create a web form and directly create an object inside of Salesforce without needing a login. That enabled us through the partner portal to create this capture form that says, tell me about your deal, and I'll create a lead object in Salesforce. And the conversion of that lead to an opportunity by our sales rep is the approval of the deal. Like, it's real, so we'll do it. And then,
so was this the first time deal registration was introduced at the company or in the market?
In the market. We invented the program.
Oh, wow. Well, that's great. Okay, because I understand the web to lead conversion like that. I mean, that's like a simple thing which I recommend everybody do today before they go into this whole best PRM system thing, right? But this is actually super interesting. Okay, so
well, it's interesting because there's the ops problem too, right? Like it sounds like the API to Salesforce, in order to make it like a reasonably efficient solution, you needed the connection to the CRM, which didn't exist before.
This was an IT project with an incentives program.
Were other people recognizing the friction and just didn't see the solution?
Yeah. I mean, the only precursor prior to this, and I'll give you the whole history, is a guy named Doug Kennedy, who then went to Microsoft and led Partners for years. Doug created the first conflict resolution deal registration system at Oracle, which was, if you tell me what you're working on, our services team won't quote services to them. And that was just if you tell me what you're on, we won't step on your toes. The insight I had was the economics of there's no money in actually selling these things unless you're the one who's proactively creating these deals, and that there was no behavioral incentive to create deals. Now, my academic background's in behavioral science, so I realized we'd created a negative disincentive curve through the way it was set up, and we'd also, the prior channel chief had done something that seems logical but actually is really bad, which was our top tier partners actually got a bonus every $100,000 they sold that gave them lower margin than everyone else. So they became price aggregators and started eating everyone. And so this notion of putting the effort equals the reward as opposed to capturing the PO equals the reward, that was the big insight. Now,
so people were experiencing that dysfunction, though. Basically, you were having partners who were putting in the work, and then that person with the huge discount was swooping in at the end and saying, well, I got the better deal. And then the other partner would just get frustrated and kind of back off from doing it, but people would still do it. Just a lot of conflict in the market. Is that essentially what it was?
Yeah, but more importantly, there were actors in the market who were specifically taking advantage of this market structure and complex software of, like, somebody goes in and spends a lot of time configuring and selling this, and hopefully they get the services dollars to deploy it. But the actual transaction, we'll go capture that transaction at a higher margin than our cost of sales. And so you had folks like, and I'm going to pick on some folks like Dell S&P and CDW, who were selling licenses but not creating deals. And this shifted that balance of power dramatically away from them towards the people that were actually in there technically creating deals. And so this leads to a slight anecdote. So we launched this program in 2004, in January 2004. At Synergy, which is the Citrix partner event, and it's at the Dolphin and Swan Hotel down in Orlando. This is such an Florida man story. So
is this a Florida man story?
It's actually Disney. No, wait, it's Disney World for people that don't know where that is.
Yeah, Disney World, the Dolphin and Swan at Disney World. And so I'm leaving the Swan Hotel to go back to the Dolphin. I had a dinner at Shula's with a bunch of partners, and as I'm walking back in, I won't tell you who, but there's a product manager from Dell S&P who's a very nice person. I'm going to be clear. She's a very nice person. But nonetheless, I had directly shot across their bow that they're no longer going to capture deals on price. And not them particularly, but anybody who was doing that. But the thing about Dell's calendar is they had just locked their financial goals for the year. So she had a plan that was predicated on being able to do this, and all of a sudden found out it's not going to happen. So needless to say, she was in the bar having a beverage or two while trying to figure out how to reset her life. And I had a beverage or two, but I'm walking through this lobby, which is where the bar is, and all of a sudden I hear this woman who I know yell, "There's that wannabe economist who thinks he could dictate how free markets are going to work." And I'm like, oh. I turn and I look at her and go, "Oh, hey, how are things at the best little whorehouse in Texas?" And that got me a note from my CEO of, "Please don't talk to partners that way. It's inappropriate." And I said, "I was just quoting a movie. It's a very popular movie."
I was just quoting a movie. I love how that's an offense.
Burt Reynolds, great movie. I was just Texas. It came in my head. And Mark was very funny. He's like, "Okay, I've admonished you. I've done my duty to tell you not to do that." That was hilarious.
Wait, right before we go further in the story, can we just take a second to recognize the contribution of Doug Kennedy? I had totally forgotten about Doug, but Doug was the guy who actually had the scale or the temperature scale, or is that correct, Ross? He had brought that from Oracle over to Microsoft too, to understand what is the feel of the partners or something. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit? This guy's a legend, right? Like, and it's interesting that he's not even like around, but the thinking was very profound, like even when he brought it in.
Doug had this notion of emotional heat maps that I really liked, which was, and this is key to understanding a lot of partners, is the program itself can be fine on paper, but the operational experience of it can be Kafkian in its level of overhead and work you have to do. And we have this problem at Oracle. And I'm trying to shift from a license-based model to a consumption-based cloud model as quickly as possible inside of a company that still has a massive applications business that's licensed and Java business that's licensed and stuff. So there's a general, how much are you protective and restrictive versus expansive and allowing in the way you approach interactions with partners. And that was one of the things he looked at Microsoft is, we have a loyal partner base, but not one that really enjoys us. There's a huge amount of friction in the system. And how do you actually delight partners instead of just serve them? And that was a really key thought. Look, Doug is a fantastic guy. I encourage everyone to model and role model after stuff he's done there. He's also an incredible drummer if you get a chance to see him play music. Very talented.
The nicest guy ever.
Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that though, because I think even today that's a question that's still very relevant, right, to the partner experience. And I know that you've studied behavioral psychology, so you've probably thought a lot about it. What's advice to other organizations on how you looking beyond the financial parameters of the program, how do you make it a more delightful experience so that the emotional attachment is positive at a core level?
Well, so one of the core things, and this is going to sound horrible, but just bear with me.
It's great.
Are you quoting a movie?
The right podcast to say it on.
Look, one of the things we do as a tech industry is we get overly fascinated with our bits and baubles and what we're making and the thing we're doing. And there are very few platforms out there. There's a guy named Dr. Peter Evans, who writes a huge amount of work around the value of platforms and what it means to be a platform as opposed to a product. Really, really brilliant guy. I encourage you to read his work. He's also on the side, one of the better EDM DJs you're going to meet. He works.
Oh, that is funny. We got to get this guy on the show.
Yeah, DJ Provost is his.
This is great.
That guy's fantastic to talk to. A really, really wonderful guy. But he talks about platforms, and very few things are actually platforms. Like cloud services, you can look at and say, okay, Oracle Cloud's a platform, Azure's a platform, but is something like Metallic Backup from Commvault a platform? No, it's a product, right? And the reason you do that is you begin to realize that from a partner's perspective, if you use the metaphor of an architect or general contractor building a house, their customer is the one who's dictating, this is what I want in the house. This functions. I needed to have this many bedrooms. I needed to, occupy this amount of space and functions. This is what I want it to be. How's the ease of ownership? There are certain things you can put in your house, like all German appliances. They run great until they don't. And then all of a sudden you've got to read manuals on how to repair them. And you realize probably should have bought something that was a little easier to understand because they're very precise, right? This is the point, as I try to explain to people, vast majority of products are toilets. What I mean by that is no one is going to buy the house because of the toilet, but no one's going to buy a house without a toilet. So just know where you sit in that partner's overall perspective of we're a product.
So instead of point solution, it's a toilet. I love it.
Well, meaning it's do I need?
I think some products are air fresheners.
Do I need an SSD storage device? Yes, I do. Do I need it to be that particular Toto version as opposed to the American Standard version? Maybe. I might need the fancy bits the Toto one has. I just got back from Japan. I'm fascinated with the toilets.
Okay.
So that's kind of the bigger thing is just realizing that the amount of friction you put around just installing the toilet inside the house, we get into you have to be, this kind of skill set, this kind of trained, We want to make sure it's a great experience. You're creating friction on something that really isn't that hard. Whereas if it's a platform and the customer is going to build on it, the customer is going to continue to build and build and build. And I argue cloud services, things like Snowflake, Adobe Marketing Cloud, Salesforce, those are SaaS platforms that operate truly like a platform. You build integrations, you build on it. Yeah, you want to be really, really, careful in those choices and make sure that's a great experience around the platform. Everything that's a product, you want to make it as easy as possible to adopt and put in that environment and not create unnecessary barriers. And that's a challenge for a lot of companies is when are you a product and when are you a platform? And when can you really have high exacting around certifications and really expect the partners to have done work to understand this as opposed to just install it, right?
So you see a lot of companies who perhaps think of themselves more as a platform, but really they're a product. And so they're putting all these kind of certifications, requirements, particular things that potential partners need to follow?
For valuation reasons, everybody wants to be a platform, but very few people are, right? And platform effects are documented. This, again, where I'm going to quote Peter Evans, but his work on platforms attract investment, platforms don't attract costs. A bunch of things along those lines are really key to understand. I do want to pause for a second and just give credit where credit's due. There's a lady named Colleen Capsay, who is the SVP of Alliances at Snowflake Software. She was my director of programs at Citrix when we launched DealReg. And while the ideation of the behavioral side of it came out of my head, the ability to put the rule systems in place and actually think through the operational of it, she was fantastic at it. So I give her co-credit for creating DealReg. I never want my name out there without hers as being foundational behind it.
We should probably have her on the show as well to understand the operations of all this stuff. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that a little bit later in the podcast. Go ahead. Okay, come finish your story.
So anyway, after Citrix Systems, I left. I went. I did a couple projects for VMware. I went and became CEO of a company called EI Digital Security, which was a turnaround. We ended up getting it turned around, but I didn't see an exit, so I left and went to Microsoft. And I took over worldwide partner strategy in 2008, right as we were converting Red Dog to Azure. And that's where I ran the original Azure partner team, the original Office 365 partner team, as well as converted Microsoft's $1.7 billion in incentive spend from transactional incentives to consumption-based incentives, and really shifted towards, you get paid based on what you deploy, not on what you sell. And that's a profound shift for Microsoft to go through. It was taking 270,000 licensed specialists in the field and trying to turn them into roles that could drive consumption and really be much more technical. So did that for 2013, left, started another consulting firm. We did a buyout of a small firm, and that became what's called the Spur Group. I left them in 2015, 16. 17, I can't remember that time period. Went to work for VMware for a couple of years, and then
was the Spur Group the channel consulting Spur Group?
Yeah.
Okay, that one. Okay.
Yeah, they were just bought by Reply.
They were just bought by Reply. Yeah. Okay.
Randy and Chris, those guys are absolutely fantastic. I had a great time there. We got it up and running, but then one of my customers, just similar to Citrix, basically said, "We're tired of leaving money on the nightstand. Come be an employee." So I ended up going to work for them.
When you were at Microsoft, was that the time that Satya was like moving over to the Azure group?
Satya was running server and tools. I was exec sponsor for Cisco, so I got to work with him there. And then he moved over to running as CEO about a month or two after I left.
Okay, yeah, because there was a time where Satya was like, "I'm gonna go do this Dynamics thing," and then for maybe 2 months. And he's like, "Forget the Dynamics, this $1.1 billion business. I'm actually going to go do this other thing," which is actually a fundamental shift in how Microsoft as a company has to go. And then it was strange because and Kelly, this is super interesting because the guy comes on stage, he gets coordinated, and then literally 2 months later, he's like, yeah, that was a mistake. I'm going to go over here. And then literally that one assignment actually put him on a path to basically become CEO because it was such a big shift in the entire company, basically.
You got to understand, in the culture of Microsoft, the Dynamics business is like New Zealand. It's completely self-contained. It's its own ecosystem, its own partners. It doesn't affect the rest of the world. It has tremendous value, but it's not really connected to anything the way, Exchange and Office 365 is the backbone of productivity, or
was there a joke inside of Microsoft where you're like, "Hey, you know what? When you go to run Dynamics, you're like XYZ"?
No, I mean, it was really good business, but it was seen as an apps business as opposed to infrastructure, right? Yeah. Now, that whole business was really an innovative one. I'll give Kirill Tatarov credit for it.
Yep, that was another really good solid leader.
Well, what he did was he was the first dev leader to take the leap to, we're going to publish to cloud first and then snapshot for installs locally, as opposed to, we're going to build an installer and then we'll update the cloud service. So build and deploy on a weekly basis to the cloud, and then every 6 months take a snapshot of features and ship that as the CD was his mantra, and it worked. And he drove the rest of the company into that.
Wow. And that, for folks that are getting a history lesson over here, is Microsoft had actually, it's not that the Dynamics suite became Dynamics Suite out of nothing. It was like Great Plains, Exapta, Solomon, Navision. These are all acquisitions that Microsoft did on a project, I think, called Project Green, if I remember correctly, or something like that was like supposed to bring them all together. This is like a massive integration project.
It was an interesting play, and I'm just going to unpack some strategy there that might not be obvious for a whole bunch of folks. Navision was a very different product than Great Plains, was very different than Solomon in the sense they went after different segments of the market. And I'll give you a way to think about enterprise software like that. So if you look at like Oracle Financials or SAP HANA, you're talking a 400 to 600,000 table application. So the table being like products or customer numbers or social security data or whatever. In the case of Dynamics and, similar things along that size, your NetSuite or whatnot, you're talking about a 30 to 40,000 table application. You look at QuickBooks, you're talking about maybe 800 tables in the entire thing. So the complexity in the amount of integration that's possible, what they decided to do with the Dynamics business is they bought these 40,000 tables do really well for manufacturers. So this one works there. These one work really well for businesses that operate across many borders because we've got all the tax tables. So Exapta worked really well there. And so that's why they never brought them together is if they brought them together, they'd end up with this chimera that was 120,000 table thing, which isn't quite big enough to take on SAP or Oracle Financials. And it's not focused enough to win the industries they're going after. So I think there's a really interesting strategy there of how they've pulled that together over time and put it into a cloud service where it's easy to adopt what you want out of it, as opposed to it being this massive ERP you have to implement. Now, that said, I think NetSuite's kicking their ass left and right, but that's my mind.
Different strategy, totally different.
Well, also numbers, right? That's it.
Yeah.
So let's see. Microsoft, I left Microsoft, went to VMware. Did the Spur Group thing after that. That was an interesting. Then went to VMware. The VMware challenge was how do you get VMware to not be just vSphere and build a channel around NSX and vRealize and vSAN and become a multi-product company. Now, that was fun. It was good for about a year and a half running partners there all up. And then Dell bought us. And when that happened, all of a sudden, all the OEMs thought of us as, well, you're compromised now. You can't possibly be neutral. And so actually enforcing that neutrality and trying to be an independent software company owned but not controlled by Dell was a bit of a challenge, especially given my history that I talked about earlier. So I did that.
Was it the recording thing or the no thing? Just kidding.
That would be the how are things at the best level.
Exactly. That's what I said.
Anyway, nice people, really good business, but they have a very different business. It's around, really an efficiency around logistics and ordering and sales processing, and not really a services company. So I left. Now I have to digress at this point and tell you my lovely bride. She had just completed her 80th quarter of closing as a sales leader and had an exit. And so her company PayScale had gone through a private transaction that bought out her equity. And she was in this mode of, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm going to take some time off in 2018. She looked at me and said, so are you. And so I took and we did a bunch of private investing. We invested. We had been invested in a winery since 2013, but we expanded that to a restaurant, 2 champagne bars, and now a bakery. And so we've got a side business, a bunch of things that make me fat and happy. But then
fat and happy.
Yeah.
But then in 2017, one of the last things I was doing was putting VMware on all the public clouds, and I'd started the conversation with Todd Weatherby. It was a great, 5 days before I go to work at VMware, I'm at Seafair, which is a big event up here, and we're boaters. So my boat's tied up next to Todd Weatherby, who runs ProServe at AWS, and he and I'd worked together at Microsoft and had a chat with him of do you think Amazon has an appetite for putting VMware on their cloud? And he's like, yeah, I think the timing's right. We've got enough of our enterprise customers that need it. So that started the VMware in the cloud conversation. And my last conversation was we'd gone through K5 with Fujitsu and Alibaba, AliCloud, and all these guys. My last conversation was with Don Johnson at Oracle, where when he started telling me what they were building, I'm enough of an engineer that when he got to their network design, I actually spit-taked a very nice Merlot at the Purple Wine Bar in 4th and in Madison downtown. Where I was chatting with him, I looked at him and said, you're going to win. What you're building is such a game-changing level of technology, which I won't bore you guys with the whole technology thing, but the short version of it is they had figured out what was wrong with the other public clouds. And the short strategic level view of it without going in engineering is What we think of as the public cloud is actually an app execution environment built on top of an architecture that already existed for other purposes. Like Google wasn't built to run GCP, it was built to run YouTube and search. And so it's a horizontally scaling environment that does Kubernetes really well for a search engine and does MapReduce and all these other things really well. Azure was built to run Global Foundation Service that runs Xbox Live and Bing and Office 365 and Dynamics Online. Azure was a app execution environment on top of that PaaS architecture. And then AWS famously, their EC2 and all that stuff was built around their e-commerce engine. And so we kind of realized that the cloud can never do what it was never engineered to do. The underlying architecture wasn't built to run stateful databases or low latency applications. The entire environment is full of network collisions and full of, conflicting resources of different people trying to share resources. And so the observation they had was a couple. I'll just share with it at a high level. One, you had to have a hardware-based control plane. So the notion of running the thing that controls the cloud on the same hardware that has the client tenancies on it, you're always contending for network resources. And as a control plane, you're a fire hose of data. You're logging data and security data and all this other stuff. So the amount of traffic the control plane itself creates, that creates collisions with tenancy workloads, creates all this latency. Then you have to deal with what happens when you're in the same rack as Netflix's recommendation engine. When it's got a new Stranger Things out, everybody's logging in to see it, and it's spinning this thing saying, what should this person be shown to watch, and what should we spin up there? That's a massive traffic generator. So you start realizing having this hardware control plane, having it on the same hardware is a problem. So we created an off-box hardware-based control plane that runs everything and doesn't contend for network resources with the client. The second thing we did, this is a little wonky, but for the folks out there who are listening to this who are network engineers, most every cloud out there is really a switch at the top of a rack, and it acts like a switch for everything within that rack, and it acts as a router for everything between the racks. It's east-west versus north-south traffic. That's called a hub and spoke topology. You've got a hub at the top, and the spoke comes down and goes left-right. We built a folded leaf and spine network, what's called a CLO non-blocking network. So two spines come down, every NIC has two connections to it. And then we built a hardware-based virtualization device for every RJ45 port. What that hardware device does is it virtualizes all the traffic at layer 2. Now, without going through the 7 layers of the OSI interconnect model. Layer 1 is the physical layer. Like, how do we actually encode 0 to 5 volts to make a bit? That's Ethernet, right? Or that's 802.11 base Wi-Fi spectrum. The layer above that is, how do we control the signaling, the actual electricity going on the wire, who has protocols, all that stuff. By virtualizing at layer 2, we created the only cloud network that never has a collision between any tenants. And it's actually at a point where you get better latency on our cloud than you do on most on-prem data centers. Well, what does that mean? Well, the entire work of getting to the cloud is twofold. One is moving your app to a microservices architecture for cloud native, so you can put it in CI/CD and run full DevOps and have this constant cascade of value on the app tier. That's fantastic. We do that really well. The second part is the part that's the labor that everybody goes through that you don't actually need to do, which is moving from a stateful database to a stateless database in the cloud. Well, why do we move to stateless databases? For two reasons. One, they scale really well horizontally in terms of cap theorem and how you make consistency and availability and partition tolerance. They do really well at that scaling thing at the expense of some of the availability, which is why when you hit refresh on Twitter, it's always a different answer. It's never the same one's coming up. It's really what's available within that shard at the time for you to see. We can do stateless. We can do stateful as well, which means for us, every workload can move to our cloud as is. So most of our migrations are 3 weeks, not 30 months of trying to rewrite the entire architecture. And then you run into this fact that because I don't have any latency and I don't have these collisions, this is my favorite stat, by the way, 30% of every dollar you spend on compute on another cloud, you lose to network collisions with other tenants in the control plane. And so if you think about economic throughput, it's not just the apps don't perform well. You're paying for those collisions because you're paying for the compute cycle that didn't complete because it's done. So, like Uber moved on our cloud. They're like, we're scratching our heads. Like, we did the spreadsheet exercise and we normalized your cost to compute versus their cost to compute, and you're still coming out a third cheaper. And they figured out it was every time they have a task in our cloud, it actually completes. Whereas in other clouds, it's only 7 out of 10 times it actually completes in a reasonable time period. So that notion of creating a more clean network and a whole bunch of other stuff we did around GPUs and the ability to do 20,000 GPUs in a data hall cluster uniquely, like it's led to this high performance. Like as an engineer, I look at this stuff and go, there's nothing else like this on the planet that we've built. And, it shows up like 65% of my customers don't have an Oracle application. They don't have an Oracle database. They're coming from custom built data centers like Zoom and Uber and all these guys who were running their own infrastructure, could never make the public cloud work. They looked at it and said, there's no way to get any performance out of that. They took one like what we're doing and said, we're going there. 100% way better than what we've built. And so that was my opportunity coming to Oracle was, hey, this is where we come full circle. My entire career has been working with partners. And I'm fundamentally at the core a partner guy, right? Oracle is not a partner company.
Yep.
I mean, and for good reason. I mean, to be really clear, it's not that they don't dislike partners. Let me just tell you the Oracle value prop prior to 2018 and the launch of our cloud. We sell 4 horizontal applications that run everything in your business. An ERP system that runs all your financials and all your manufacturing, all that stuff. A supply chain system that runs all your suppliers and inbound systems. HCM, the old PeopleSoft platform that runs all your people management, and then the Sales Cloud and CX, which runs all your customer experience marketing platforms, all that stuff. If that's not enough, I also have 87 industrial apps like Opera that'll run your hotel, or FlexCube that'll run your regional bank, across telephone systems that can run your OSS, BSS, and your customer experience and all your packet core networks. All of those things we've built for, really 3,000 customers globally that depend on us to run everything. Then we deliver that on an engineered appliance called Exadata, running our database with our version of Oracle Linux, with our Java operating application environment, delivered by Oracle Consulting, then run by Advanced Consulting Services, our MSP in-house for day 2. There isn't, like, if you look at that compared to an SAP environment, it's, okay, now go screw your Cisco switch in the top, get your Dell server stood up here, put your NetApp storage on the bottom, load Windows in, put VMware on top of that, then load the HANA environment. That's all integration, pulling all these things together. If it all comes pre-integrated, there really isn't a partner play. Now you go to Oracle Cloud, which is a platform for everything in IT, and it runs everything as is, whether it's cloud native or serverless or whatever, it just runs. Now Oracle has to shift from, we are a app company that delivers our apps in a very tailored experience, to we're a platform for everything in IT, which means for everybody who builds their business off professional services, we're a place they can now show up to work and deliver better results for their customers. And so that's a massive pivot for Oracle to go from, we don't need partners, to, it's like a little bit like Willy Wonka coming after 30 years in the chocolate factory and opening it up and going, by the way, all this massive engineering we've been doing for 44 years and building the most performant databases on the planet, the most performant compute platforms on the planet, that's now available for a subscription. Come get it. And so, like, I have a team that's just out recruiting new partners, which Oracle's not recruited new partners in like 20 years. And they're walking into customers, partners who have 60,000 people on bench. And the reactions we're getting is like, where have you been? Like, you guys have been off in your own land for so long. And then we show them the candy factory of what we've built. And their reaction is, oh my God, this is unbelievable what you've done. Now, are you guys behaving? Are you guys still jackasses to everybody? And I'm like, well, we're a little bit like a teenager. Bits of us are maturing at different points. There's a lot of awkward interactions and schooling we have to take people through. So a lot of my job is how to transform Oracle into being partner friendly, at the same time introduce partners to this platform that they can do scale work on. Well, that was a long.
I think that but actually,
too, folks.
that goes to I feel like listening to your whole career journey, which was super interesting, and I think there's a lot of market history packed into the story, so it was great. But change management does seem to be a key part of your career, whether you're coming in and changing a partner experience or you're coming in and changing the go-to-market from within an organization. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that's really what's in front of you right now, both partner-facing and internally.
Yeah.
So would love your advice on how to do that most effectively. I know it's a very broad subject, but I think a lot of partnerships people are in organizations where their C-suite are not fully bought into that motion. So there are a lot of people in that position of saying, I need to do the work to change the mentality around that.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your advice.
So this is where the shift to a platform makes a big difference. because the argument against partner that most senior execs have is we're selling our stuff. Our stuff is our stuff. Like, why do I need this third party to sell our stuff? And it's a little bit like, hey, we got miles of toilets back here. I don't know why we need a contractor to put these in houses. Well, because they're not actually selling the toilet. They're selling a house. The toilet's just part of it, right? So some of this, like, storage products and things like that get dragged along on solution sales. Yet the sales reps think, no, we're really selling them a storage refresh, not this is part of an architecture and it's just a component. So I think there's a lot of notion, especially in the software business, of you're buying a license. Nobody's better equipped to tell you about what's in the license and what your rights are than us. So how is a partner going to do a better job on it? Now, when you look at it as a platform, you realize this is where they show up to work. Like, this is my favorite conversation I have with people inside of Oracle. It's like, what do you think Accenture does every day? 760,000 employees. What's the typical day for an Accenture employee? It's showing up at one of our customers and building code and then pushing that code to the cloud. That's what their job is. Now, do you want them to push that to Azure or do you want them to push that to OCI? Very quickly it becomes, oh no, they're like, I'm not going to compete with them. I'm certainly not going to replace Azure with my 270 people in US that do services with their, several 100,000. Like, that's just a physics problem, right? I'm not going to compete with them in any way, shape, or form for their footprint they have. So it really becomes how do I get them to look at my platform as a better place to solve problems for customers? And better is a soft thing because it gets better for the customer, easier for them to get stuff to the outcomes they want, long-term value for their customers. They're not taking their customer down a cul-de-sac they can't get out of and stuff like that. So that's very different than sell my product. That's please work on this platform. That's do what you do. Let me help you do more of it. And let me help you do it faster. When you position, and this is the senior exec conversation, if I position partners as they sell our stuff, they look at it and go, why do I need them? I've got all these sellers over here. If I position it as our sellers sold a platform and now we have a remaining performance obligation on the books of these credits we've sold this customer that unless they consume them, we're not going to renew them. These people will consume them. How do we get them to work consuming them? Now I'm very interested in having them show up to do work because now the sale is separated from the work. And this is kind of a truism about us. My fastest growing segment of my partner is in what's called solution delivery only. I pay them a percentage of the consumption, but they're nowhere involved in the transaction. The transaction for cloud credits might have occurred 2 years ago where they bought $20 million worth of cloud credits. What I want this partner doing is pushing this next $500,000 worth of consumption live in the cloud so that $2 million worth of cloud credits gets consumed and we get to the end of that contract. The customer's like, let's re-up for 4. Let's buy more so we can keep going faster, right? So that's the shift. I think it's really difficult in a products business to say the partner can do more than the field can. Now, you can make the argument they can reach customers the field can't. That's a coverage model. Like typically most enterprises are covered by a direct sales team and you go to mid-market, it's not. They say that's the realm of the channel. But that's a flaw in the sense that no partner organizes themselves based on customer size. Like if you look at a partner in Atlanta, they're selling to Delta and Home Depot and to Atlanta Screw and Supply that does hardware stuff and to local restaurants and stuff. So it's not I only do enterprise or only do mid-market. I do the whole thing. So you end up with these conflicts. If I need you in mid-market, but I'm not sure I need you in enterprise, but all the money's in enterprise. But so how do I tailor incentives? And it just ends up creating this conflict-oriented model. Gets a lot easier when it's we've sold them a platform. Now somebody needs to show up and do the work of deploying the platform and consuming it. So that's kind of the hook inside of Oracle is I'm not trying to change their mind on the value of partners as it relates to software licensing. Skip right past that. What I care about is do they show up to work on our platform and are we valuable for them? And
so are you then recruiting a lot of like regional system integrators and stuff? Like who's part of the recruiting charter?
So it's interesting. I have to explain some things about it. So we're a multi-cloud company in the sense that the other clouds kind of built with this notion of a moat around them that says once data comes in, it's expensive to take it out. Our egress costs are 90% lower than the other clouds. So inter-cloud work is very easy. And we have a partnership with Microsoft where in, I think, 12 of our regions, there's a sub 2 millisecond fiber connection between the Azure tenancy and the OCI tenancy. So there's a high need in the Azure partner community for performant stateful databases like Exadata and Oracle stuff that we do. So we have a lot of customers that we're getting through partners that look at us and go, look, there's a set of problems that Azure just doesn't do well, like around performant low latency networks, HPC, bare metal VMware, those sorts of things that you guys do really well. If I can set up an environment where they have both clouds and they're federated under a single identity structure, I, as a partner, then can decide which workload goes to which cloud based on the economics and performance. That's been growing like crazy for us. And it's been good for Microsoft because their customers are happier. They're looking at going, these things that we didn't think there was a path to solve in Azure, we've actually solved with Microsoft and Oracle. And so that message is getting out really, really well in the marketplace. And so we're going after a lot of partners that have Azure practices and showing them how to add OCI on as a way to extend what they're doing there. It's not in my interest to tell people to move anything off Azure if it's working, right?
They're already there. What else can you add to it?
But only 30% of the enterprise workloads have made it to the cloud. The other 70% are stateful, performant, things like that I'm the natural repository for it. So we end up winning a lot of those. The other thing is the way we build cloud regions is different than everyone else. I can build an entire cloud region in a customer's data center in 18 racks, and I can do it at the same price as the public region with no hardware costs, no incremental markups, all that stuff. So I can move the cloud on-prem, and for customers that are like running GCP or running AWS, they're like, there's these workloads that aren't going to go out for either for regulatory control reasons, for performance reasons, like something running a distribution warehouse. You have these robotic pick, pack, and ship, these robots that go around and pull packages off and bring them down for distribution. Those require extremely low latency connections to the server that's governing those robots, right? I can put that on-prem as a cloud service at the same price as the public cloud and run those things as a single rack cloud solution. So I have this notion of distributed and integrated. That's opening up for partners a tremendous sort of field of like, you can solve stuff the other guys can't. That's additive. That's blue ocean. That's not go compete for Azure's business. That's go compete for stuff they can't do and create some value. And that overwhelming creation of value for partners is kind of our goal, not contesting for share of wallet.
Okay, so I know we have 4 minutes left. I'm sure we're going to have you back on again. I did want to talk about one thing. Like I'd say almost 10 years ago, you wrote the 6 roles of channel chief.
Yeah, I'm updating it right now.
I know. And I looked at it and I was like, man, so many of those things are still true. Although my only beef is like the channel chief isn't necessarily like a recognized like org chart title. It's just like, yeah, we like you. We want to seem fancy out there. Go do like, we'll give this to you, right? But what are some of the things that you're seeing, because partnership leaders is in the business of like helping create the next generation of leaders and partnerships, but people that are legit folks like yourself, right? Like not people that are just those let's go hang out at the bar and stuff like that, right? Like we are all about like impact and like revenue and things like that, right? So that's one of the reasons why we exist. So I really wanted to understand, like, as you connect the dots in the future, the role of this, let's call it channel chief or chief partner officer, whatever, the leader of the indirect growth, what's required now?
So I'm going to tell you something that may be obvious once you hear it, but it's kind of non-obvious for a lot of people until they hear it. Most companies are driven by committees, right? There's formal hierarchical structures, like this is the person who's in charge, like chief accounting officer can say no to a rebate. Okay, that's their job, right? But like inside of VMware, there's a pricing committee that controls everything having to do with price of products, discounting, incentive programs, all that other sort of stuff. That gets to what's the margin realized on the product. When I joined that company, my team under me was very adamant of, you go get on that committee. Like, don't be a petitioner to it as the channel chief, be a decider on it. And so I worked with the folks running it and made my case as to why having the partner voice in that committee would make a ton of sense. Now, all of a sudden, partner had a seat at the table in how prices are done. And so what I argue, and this is the thing, is it's not just saying, okay, there's this channel chief owns, getting partner point of view into the product planning process. There are committees that decide things around the product planning process that partner needs a table at. Go work for those. Go argue for your position in those committees, because that's where the decisions of the business are made. The mistake I see a lot of channel chiefs making is they think their job is external. They think their job is literally to be the guy on the stage telling partners what are going on. And it is, to a certain extent. Partner chief as communicator is an absolute external aspect of the job. But showing up and being part of the levers of power inside the company, you have to be able to craft and make an argument as to why you deserve to be there. If you make that argument in a cogent way and get the right exec sponsorship, partner becomes core to the business. It's not we build a bunch of stuff, then the partner team takes it and does stuff with it. You become part of the design. I can't emphasize enough that is the like cultures are made of rituals and artifacts. Artifacts are things like who wins recognition for, employee of the month or, partner of the year, that sort of stuff. Rituals are how we make decisions. Being part of those rituals is absolutely key. I'm quoting Kennedy and Deal's corporate culture book from the 1970s if anyone to read it, but it's the foundational thing that injecting yourselves into those rituals is how you develop power.
I'm so glad you said this, because for the last 6 or 7 months, there's this notion in the market that we need to go and educate the CROs and CMOs and all these people about the value partnerships. And my personal view is, having gone through some of this myself, is, well, if the partner leader sucks, they're just not listening to anything you're going to say. The partner leader has to stand up for themselves, become an industry benchmark leader, actually have the gravitas to say no and things that we've talked about, and show up, and then go demand that that there's a vision that they have, that and a point of view that they see to drive the company, versus just take orders. So I'm really glad you said that, because this is the whole reason of my thinking.
I had this conversation with an employee who will go nameless on this one at VMware, where he was like, man, our CFO and our CAO just don't get it. I looked at him and said, you mean to tell me a guy who can correctly and accurately assess the valuation of private companies off the top of his head, just based on a view of their IP and what their revenue at, has no idea how to value partners? That's all he does, is value things. That's what they do. Now, let me give you a different perspective. You've not made a cogent argument in the language they use of valuation for partner.
Correct.
Oh,
correct.
Right. Now it's me.
Yeah,
right.
Totally. And it requires practice. And the problem is there's no place to go practice. Obviously, fortunately, this is kind of Kelly will be like, this is Asher just being Asher. But this is why partnership leaders exist, because we provide the area for people to actually understand how to go do these things. But the framing of what you need to go do first is correct yourself on how to become an industry benchmark executive. So you could do that. I think everything else will be fine.
You have to tell your value story in the language of the listener. Like the value story for the sales guy is how you build and close pipeline. The value story for the CFO is how you control and get leverage in the business and control costs. The value for the ops person is how you off book a whole bunch of OpEx to other businesses to be able to run operations for us. Just getting that language down, it becomes second nature.
100%, totally. And we actually had this conversation actually internally in PL as well, because we have 1,300 members. And the question was the value prop for partnerships is always so hazy. And we're like, no, it's not. It's just generate indirect revenue. Figure it out. And that's it. It's literally generate indirect revenue. It's 3 words. If you just circle in on that.
It's not that simple. I think what Ross is saying is true. You have to put it in the language of who you're talking to. And that's going to sound different in every conversation. And it's a skill and a talent to be able to do that.
It's totally. That is true. But you got to have your own bearings correct first, and not be all these other things. Just have your thing first, and then go talk in the other person's language, communicate, which is the basis of communication, and it'll get through.
One of the best conversations I ever had was with a guy named Dave Friedman, who is the general counsel at Citrix. And the conversation we were going through was on this program where it was obvious as daylight to me the impact DealReg was going to have on the industry and on our business. It was going to correctly identify who was creating business and hyper shift the rewards to that creation activity as opposed to capture. All right, so that's the argument for the CFO. That's the argument for the chief revenue officer. That's the argument for the head of products. My conversation with the general counsel was on how we're going to shift risk off of our books and onto the partner. That they're going to own delivery and configuration of more deals, and we won't own the go live. Our partners will own a greater number of go lives. As a result, that moment of truth is going to sit outside of our company and not be tied to our license contract.
Yeah,
he loved it. He was like all the stuff that I talk about, growth and blah blah blah. That's the real reason to do it. But the language for him was risk reduction. He signed up. And
that's a great example.
I know we're out of time, and we're respectful to everybody. And also, we get feedback that when our podcasts are over an hour, they become super long. But yeah. I do want to close on this one thing.
Yeah.
The leader of the ecosystem, channel, whatever you call it, indirect growth, is a very internal role. It's an operator role, not a functional role. And yes, you should be going to conferences and stuff like that to shake hands, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a very internal role because there's a lot of internal building that's happening inside the company. And if there was no other takeaway that people took from this, at least the people that actually want to become leaders of indirect growth at companies, this is the key takeaway. And if you don't enjoy it, don't be it, because you're just fighting something that you're just not naturally designed to do. And very few people in partnerships will actually go do this. So I know you have a comment on that.
I do, but I'll share with you what I told Kelly on a prior call as a teaser. Maybe we can get back together and talk about this. Yep. There is no greater wealth creation event than a turnaround. And turnarounds are inherently leveraged by partners. Meaning, it's really hard to turn around a direct sales company because you don't get any leverage out of it. But if you can get the channel moving productively around a new offer, a new change in strategy, whether that's a change in your go-to-market model, a change in your product offerings, a change in those things, the leverage is predictable. And so I've spent most of my career going into companies where they've got the product right. They've just screwed up the go-to-market. And the economics of getting that right as an employee are astounding if you can do it right.
All right. On that note, we'll pause here. We'll bring you back. I mean, this is like all the guests, at least on this podcast, we all have to bring them back on because there's conversations we're having, and then we're like, let's give the market some time to digest them and then bring you all back again to share some more goodness. But in closing, I'll just say there's a lot of people. I mean, I'm really glad we talked a little bit about Dave Kennedy on this call or this podcast, but there's a lot of people that have done things in the past that people that are listening to this podcast should go find out the history, because oftentimes the people that are like, let's call it the innovators, are just thinking that people in the past didn't actually know what they were doing. So we'll just go create everything new. And that's actually not true, right? There's a lot of amazing things people have done. Sorry?
We're not great at documenting our past.
Exactly. All right. Well, Ross, thank you so much. Kelly, as always, this was great. You guys hold on for 1 second so that we can get the podcast uploaded, but we'll be back for another episode of Unlearn in a few weeks.
Awesome. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Unlearn. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit unlearnpodcast.com for the transcripts.